Alrighty, welcome back to Shut Up and Ball. I am Aaron Chow, accompanied by my co-host John Harris, as always, and we're back to react to good old Week 1 of the NFL season here in 2024/2025 season. And I mean, did not disappoint as always. I mean, football is back, people, and it definitely came in full force. Had a bunch of comebacks, a couple of upsets, etc. This weekend, some fantasy stuff going on, especially in the Monday night game. But nonetheless, we're gonna go over each game in a pretty much chronological order. If you're wondering pick wise, our picks went down to Monday night. I'm not sure if you saw that, John. I know you did some of the spreadsheet. But yeah, it was ironically came down to that Monday night game, which we'll talk about later. And obviously, you picked the Niners if others don't remember. So you did get a leg up in Week 1, and he also beat me in our fantasy league, in our dynasty league. So which isn't a surprise, by the way, to those that don't know, but because John's a defending champ. But yeah, so it's a good Week 1 for you also, because we'll talk about them later. But your Cowboys won also.
Yep.
So all right. Let's start first at the Thursday night game. It was the Kansas City Chiefs beating the Baltimore Ravens 27-20. Classic football cliche. I'm sure like every post had this, but like game of inches as went down to the final plays. Unfortunately, Isaiah Likely, who had a had a great performance for the Ravens. His foot was out of bounds for the potential game tying touchdown, although the Ravens were going to go for two. By the looks of it, so who knows what would happen. But nonetheless, yeah, John, what were your thoughts here on this? On the opening game?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, both teams kind of looked like what I expected them to look like. I expected it to be a tough game for both sides, evenly matched teams. Like you said, Isaiah Likely, if his shoe size was a little bit smaller, then we could have been sitting there and watching an overtime game. Really, the thing that stood out to me on both sides was number one. For the Ravens, didn't feel like they got enough Zay Flowers. Justice Hill really stood out as a running back receiving. I mean, the guy had 6 catches, which was just as many as Zay did, but he had 52 yards, so he had a solid day. Rashad Bateman actually kind of got involved, was their second leading receiver with 53 total yards behind Likely. It was interesting, like I said, that they didn't get Zay Flowers, and maybe even more surprising, they didn't get Mark Andrews really involved. And I think it's Week 1, so we're not overreacting, and I almost think it's maybe a good thing that we saw that other people can step up. Rashad Bateman can make some big plays, had that 38-yard catch. Isaiah Likely can go off for 111 yards, and all of a sudden now you have this dynamic tight end duo, because by no means is Mark Andrews being phased out of this offense or anything like that. He's still one of the top tight ends in the league, and so when they can finally get Mark Andrews fully involved and they get Zay Flowers fully involved, and maybe Derrick Henry can be a little more efficient on the ground with his touches, this Ravens offense could be scary, because one of the things that's consistently sort of held them back over the years has been the lack of diverse weapons apart from Mark Andrews, really. So I'm actually kind of excited to see this Ravens offense moving forward. I felt like they had a pretty solid performance considering how good this Chiefs defense is. So although they came up short, I think it was an encouraging game on their side. And I do feel like, maybe if Lamar doesn't fumble and lose that one, maybe if Likely's toe, was a little bit inside, then who knows? Ravens could have came out on top just as easily as the Chiefs did. So then on the Chiefs side, it was great to see Rashee Rice back in form, 7 catches, over 100 yards. Xavier Worthy clearly showing that he can be a big play guy, and unfortunately I had to play against him in multiple fantasy leagues, and I lost both of them. So that's unfortunate, because didn't expect that Xavier Worthy would come out and, he'd only touched the ball 3 times, but 2 of them would result in long touchdowns. So that's great. But yeah, it was good to see him having big plays, because Kansas City having somewhat of a similar issue to what I just mentioned with Baltimore last year, where it's like they didn't have a lot of diverse weapons. It was really a lot of Travis Kelce, and then later in the year, Rashee Rice kind of came into his own, and then obviously Pacheco on the run game. But the receiving game was lackluster, especially when it came to the explosive plays. But Xavier Worthy clearly has shown the ability to do that already, and that's even without Hollywood Brown, too, who can make some explosive plays in his own right because he was out with injury. So, yeah, I think for both of these teams, I'm very much looking forward to the offensive numbers that we could be seeing out of them this year, because it feels like they're finally starting to get a diversity in terms of the weapons they have.
Yeah. I guess to start with Kansas City, seems like Rashee Rice kind of taking. I'm not saying exactly Travis Kelce, but he's kind of taking that role in regards to being the underneath short to intermediate threat. We obviously saw that. He was Mahomes targeted him the most. 9 targets, and like you mentioned, he was their leading receiver. So yeah, kind of picking up off last year, then leaned kind of heavy on the run game. Mostly Pacheco wasn't extremely efficient, but kudos. It's one of those things that I like to see from Andy Reid, because sometimes in previous years he strayed away, and I was worried about that coming into this year because all the talk was Kansas City was they want to get their high flying, the deep ball back, but obviously very patient with that. And like you mentioned, fortunately for you and probably many others, they did capitalize on a couple opportunities that they maybe didn't have last year with Worthy. So it'll be interesting to see how much more they can add, onto his plate as the season goes on. For that, for the Ravens, like only main criticism and concern I have, because like we mentioned, this was a close game, so tough to nitpick. Obviously, Lamar missed a couple of throws, but to be fair, Mahomes did too. There was, the one to P. Ryan on the left sideline, which would have been definitely a first down / could have been more at one point. But I am concerned a little bit about Lamar usage. Now, granted, this was first game of the week, and they get 3 extra days, so maybe that's part of the game plan. But like 16 carries for Lamar, I know he ran efficiently well, but we've seen this before. It was 2 years ago, right, when he got hurt before he got his contract. Remember the last month? I just worry about that because, I would like to have seen them maybe a little bit more under center, be more patient with Derrick Henry. But once again, maybe it was a game plan thing. So it's once again week 1. There's gonna be a lot of overreaction, so I'm not trying to do that as well. But like you mentioned, it is good / I'm trying to think of a better word. But I do like you mentioned, Isaiah Likely being more involved. So maybe they'll do, like you said, more 2 tight end sets because offensive line was a concern for them. Obviously, a bunch of new pieces. So maybe that's a way to kind of mitigate those losses. And like we said before, just get your best 11 out there in a sense. And obviously, Likely and Lamar kind of have a pretty good connection because not all of those were even plays within the structure of the play. It was some off script stuff. So and then. Yeah, the Zay Flowers usage is a little bit concerning, but once again, it's a pretty good Kansas City defense, that knows how to play the Ravens, and that's probably why Mark Andrews is also limited as well. Those 2 guys seeing a lot of attention, as many would think, as coming into the game. Those 2 are the main 2 passing threats. So yeah, we'll see how both these teams shape up going forward, but nonetheless, good to see both competitive. And both sides, especially on both sides of the ball. We saw some turnovers made by both defenses as well, on top of the offensive performances. So we'll see. Obviously, probably see these 2 teams in the playoffs in theory going forward, and we'll see if they can make it. But good win for the Kansas City Chiefs at home to kick off the year. Let's move on.
I did want to add real fast before we do move on, because I remember too. If everybody remembers the play right before the likely would have been touchdown, where he throws it, Zay Flowers wide open in the back of the end zone. Yeah. I remember sitting there thinking, look at that play, like, man, Lamar, what was that throw? In the post game interview, and this is to cut him some slack, he says that on the actual play, and maybe this is just a vision thing. It's because when I watched it, I was criticizing the throw. I thought he was throwing to Zay Flowers. He's saying that in the post-game interview, he sees Rashad Bateman, who's actually a little bit in front of where Zay Flowers runs through, and Rashad stops, and that's the throw that he was throwing to. So that's why it looked like it was so far behind Zay Flowers, because he was trying to sort of throw to Bateman, but also somewhat lead him into the open space because he had stopped. And then, unfortunately, literally, he said that right as the ball was leaving his hand, he sees Zay, and he knows that he just cost the opportunity. He missed the shot they should have had. Yeah. So just wanted to throw that out there because I remember sitting there thinking, man, Lamar, that was an awful throw, but he actually wasn't even trying to throw to Zay. So if he was, he probably would have got him, and they would have been going to OT. So
yeah, I do want to add on that too, because I live I thought too, because I remember he stepped up in the pocket too, and then he kind of slung it, so it was a little bit awkward to him throwing it, but so that makes more sense as to what you said.
And even to build on that too, the reason he steps up in the pocket is I believe that I think it's Justice Hill was the running back on the play, is blocking Chris Jones.
And
he he says that he sees it and he's trying to help Justice because he knows that Justice is in a terrible matchup. And so he steps up to try and avoid the pressure and give Justice more of an angle because he knows Chris Jones is going to get in that backfield. So there's just, it's one of those things where it's like when you watch it live, you're like, you put all the blame on one guy, and then, you know, when you actually hear the breakdown of the play, it's like, okay, clearly there was some sort of offensive line failure that allowed Chris Jones to get one-on-one in the backfield with a running back. And so Lamar's having to overcome for that. And then, you know, with Chris Jones getting that pressure, he doesn't have the time to necessarily see Zay Flowers, so he rushes the throw to Bateman. If he holds it for half a second longer, boom, he probably hits Zay Flowers in the end zone. And it's one of those things where it's like that's the margins the NFL operates on. So,
yeah, that's a good point, because I do want to bring up a concern that I heard on another podcast. I think it was Chris Simpson Button. He was mentioning that could be an issue that maybe Baltimore needs to iron out, because that happened twice where,
yeah,
like that, and like you said, that can't happen. So I don't know if that's on Lamar, that's an offensive line, but that's something they have to iron out, is their pass protection, because obviously other teams are going to, like, the pass protection rules and adjustments. So obviously you don't want to leave Chris Jones on one-on-one with your running back at any time. So,
yeah.
And yeah, not everyone has Lamar too to at least buy a little more time. But anyway, Chiefs prevail there. Let's go on to the Friday night game, which was the international game in Sao Paulo, Brazil, between the Philadelphia Eagles, who were technically the home team, as they beat my Green Bay Packers 34-29. What were your thoughts here on this game?
Close game. My main thoughts came down to, obviously we were hoping that the Jordan Love injury wasn't anything serious. It's really unfortunate considering the circumstance too, that it was at the very end of the game. I think it was literally the last play, right?
Third to last, but yeah, it was basically like 10 seconds left.
And it sucks that, like, that's the kind of situation that happens. Luckily, I think the reports are that it's not like a ACL tear or anything like that. So he should be able to come back this season. It should be, I think the report I saw was 3 to 5 weeks. So that's definitely huge because, you know, as a Celtics fan who watched Gordon Hayward get injured 5 minutes into his tenure there, it would really suck to see Jordan Love, after the way he had finished last year and the contract he gets and all the excitement Packers fans have for the season, to then see him immediately go down with a huge injury. That would have been awful. So we're glad that he is going to be okay, at least, you know, and be able to come back in about a month or so. That said, in terms of the rest of the game, I'm not totally surprised in the offensive production I saw out of the Packers. You know, I never really knew who the wide receiver one would be in that offense, but, you know, it always kind of felt like maybe it could be Jaden Reed because of the year that he had last year and the explosive plays he can have. Now, one of them was, I don't know what that one wide open play was. Was it a broken coverage or?
It seemed like that because he just.
I have no clue, because that was one of the most open receivers I've ever seen in my life on that one long play that he had. So I'm not sure what happened there. Otherwise, Romeo Doubs being consistent. It seems that Tucker Kraft is probably going to be the tight end that you want to have in that offense, as I believe he played a majority of snaps compared to Luke Musgrave. Could just be a week one scheme thing. I'm not sure. I mean, the target count was 3-2, so it's not like in terms of targets there was a big difference. I'm just going off a snap count here, but once again, that could just be based on the team that they're playing. Josh Jacobs, I feel like Josh Jacobs got a lot of flack for the game he had. Now, I do know that his stats are somewhat inflated because he did have that 132-yard run, so it's like in terms of efficiency, most of his day wasn't as efficient as the stats would maybe indicate. But I felt like, you know, you're playing the Eagles, and if we know anything about the Eagles, it's that defensive line has always been their strength, and it did seem like Josh Jacobs was getting a ton of criticisms for that game, and maybe you can shed some light on it, because I will say that I wasn't necessarily like specifically trying to diagnose Josh Jacobs' play the entire game, so maybe you have a better read on what that was about, but it seemed like a lot of people were giving Josh a lot of flack for this one. Meanwhile, it's like his first game in a whole new offense, so I thought he did all right. On the Eagles side of the ball, who's surprised at anything that we saw there either? Saquon Barkley scores 3 touchdowns. Wow, he's not behind one of the worst offensive lines in the league. He's not having, you know, one of the worst quarterbacks in the league on his team. He can actually be an explosive playmaker that can make a huge difference. I don't think anybody's surprised at that. Obviously, 3 touchdowns. I don't know if anybody's predicting that to happen in week 1. But At the same time, we do have to acknowledge that historically, Green Bay has had some struggles against the run game and against running backs specifically. So I'm sure that you'll maybe talk about that a little bit more because Saquon definitely ate y'all up on the ground. When it comes to the air, Jalen Hurts had his moments where he looked solid. Specifically, that one long throw to A.J. Brown, that huge touchdown they had over there. And so maybe you'll talk about the explosive plays too, because like Saquon had a 34-yard run. A.J. Brown had that 67-yard reception. I think Devonta Smith and Dallas Goedert both had a couple 20-plus yard catches. But at the same time, classic Jalen Hurts, when he throws over the middle, man, I keep saying this. And, I want him to get better at it. I really do. Well, actually, I don't because I'm a Cowboys fan. But, like, I don't dislike Jalen Hurts. And for his own career, like, I'm hoping he gets better at it. But surprise, surprise, one of those interceptions he threw over the middle, it was a terrible throw. He tried to throw it deep. There was multiple guys there. I think it was A.J. Brown on the receiving end, and the throw wasn't there. And he tried to force it, and it resulted in an interception. And he had 2 on the day. So, yeah, I feel like this is just kind of going to be a thing with Jalen Hurts. I think that just in general, over the middle, I don't know if that's kind of his thing. I think he's got to stick to the sidelines, and that's historically where he gets his work done. So, you stick to the sidelines and rely on Saquon, and I think the Eagles are going to be all right. So, yeah, in terms of what I saw from the Eagles, this offense is very much why I expected them, in our preseason predictions, why I picked them to go to the Super Bowl, because you add Saquon Barkley. I really think that when Jalen Hurts has these kind of games like he did last year where the turnovers happen, I think Saquon is going to be good enough to overcome those things and help you have a much more balanced attack, because last year it sort of felt like the Eagles' offense would go as Jalen Hurts would go, and if he would turn the ball over, they were done for. So, yeah, tough game for both teams. The Eagles come out on top. I'm a little bummed they did because it counts as a home game for them, and I was hoping they would lose it, and then they would have technically like less home games the rest of the year in terms of like true home field advantage, But they won their home game that wasn't really one, and even though the Packers lost, I think it was a tough game, and luckily, like I said, Jordan Love came out with not as serious as an injury as it could have been.
Yeah. So I'm not okay. I didn't have as much harsh criticism on Josh Jacobs. If anything, I was at one point
I was
wanting a little more patience with the run game, especially in the second half. I think in the third quarter too, especially there's a couple drives, maybe the second quarter. A lot of football in the brain, but we had like a 3 and out where, especially the drive before we had scored and it was a pretty balanced, attack, and then next drive, pass, which I don't mind sometimes, but especially the way Jordan, when he was out there, it wasn't perfect. Like the passing offense, there was a couple throws that Jordan missed and a couple drops by the receivers. I know Wicks had a tough day as well. So yeah, if anything, I wanted a little more out of just him getting more chances, and I thought he did, especially as the game went on. He got better and better, and I think another thing to point out too, which maybe this played a factor, and once again this affects both teams, is just the field conditions were not great either.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure how that fit, and that maybe that affected play calling at one point or whatnot. But yeah, I'm not too concerned about the offense, and if anything, this is good because now we're going to be leaning a lot more on Josh Jacobs while Jordan Love is out. So maybe it's a little bit of you got to find the silver lining there, because obviously Malik Willis will probably be the starter. They've probably named him starter for week 2, so we'll see. When Jordan comes back from that MCL sprain, and then on the flip side, like I do like that my defense got a couple turnovers. Sucks we honestly should have been beating the Eagles by more early on. Like you mentioned, there's that one early interception on their first drive that got us some plus territory. Then they also had that kind of a botched snap as well that we got on top of. And it should have been at least 10-0, maybe 14-0, but instead it's what was like 6-0. And then, the Eagles it was only one possession game. It's not as much of they weren't behind the 8 ball as much. So, yeah, I am concerned a little bit about the defense. Once again, it's tough. It's like, it's the Eagles. We know they still have a great offensive line. And like you mentioned, I mean, it's all these weapons. I will give credit to Kellen Moore, and it's be interesting to see going forward. And they showed the stat on the broadcast, a lot more motion in the Eagles offense. And I think that obviously helped Jalen Hurts out, especially as the game went on. He wasn't, especially for like the short, little bit, him and Devonta Smith, kind of short in the middle, kind of like the 5-8 yard passes. Saw a lot more of those. Jalen just making a quick decision and getting the ball out to either it's Devonta Smith usually or sometimes Goddard to keep make things easier because then especially with the Eagles with how good they are like we just mentioned it makes second and short and third and short and at times fourth and short is much easier for them. So it was it'd be interesting to see how if they can keep that up on offense because I mean they definitely put the Packers defense in a bind, which like I said I still think and we saw talent wise like not too far apart from the Eagles. It's just that we'll see if on our end we can button up some things because obviously that big touchdown AJ Brown stunk and like I said we had multiple opportunities even they even like you mentioned about Hurts throwing over the middle. I mean there was that his second interception to Jair where they were in the red zone. So in theory, Eagles, probably outside of the turnovers, played better overall, especially on offense than Green Bay, I would say. But and obviously with no Devin White either on their defense. As once again, I don't expect Zach Bond to ball out the way he did as well as Rodrigo Blankenship. But it was just a good performance. Gritty one by the Eagles, but I would definitely be concerned about their defense. So because while they did have some timely turnovers, like I just mentioned, like Packers offense wasn't really sinking all that way, and it's not getting any easier for them. But nonetheless, good win for the Eagles. And I mean, if they can keep using motion on offense, of Hurts, like I said too, he did make some calls. You can see he made a couple adjustments, mid at the line of scrimmage at times, a couple times. So those are things that we kind of dinged him for in our rankings going forward. If those are things he can keep building upon, he can be a much more dangerous quarterback like we both fear. But anything else you want to add before we move to the Sunday games?
That's it.
All right. Let's go on down to the Sunday games. Like I said, some of these will be quicker than others. We're going to start with one of the more, not really surprising by us because we both picked Pittsburgh. But the Pittsburgh Steelers, they get the win over the Atlanta Falcons. No touchdowns needed. No Russell Wilson needed as Russell was out with a calf injury. Justin Fields, your boy, stepped in. And they, in classic Pittsburgh fashion, went into Atlanta and and just ruined the Kirk Cousins debut as they went 18-10. What were your thoughts here?
Yeah, I mean, this is what we both expected. This is what Pittsburgh does. They make games ugly. They win those close ones. And I am not at all surprised that this is the kind of game that they were able to win, considering, the fact that, they don't score an offensive touchdown. Yeah, but that's like Pittsburgh is used to those kind of games where it's going to come down to the kicker. We're going to play sound football. We're going to play good defense. And there you go. On the Pittsburgh end, by no means am I really surprised about anything. The only thing that I was a little concerned about is I believe, was it you who sent it, or maybe it was our friend Matt who sent it, that said in terms of snap count, Van Jefferson actually played more than George Pickens did.
But I've heard that too.
I will say Pickens had 7 targets. 6 of them he caught for 85 yards. Van Jefferson only had 1 target. So in terms of like the actual production, there wasn't much of a impact there. Like even if Van Jefferson did play more, maybe it was just a lot of blocking or something. But I don't even think is Van Jefferson considered like a great blocker or something? I don't know. So
maybe because he's not their franchise guy, they're like, okay, let's throw him out there more for some of those run plays, and it could be a week 1 thing too. Or like okay, like Pickens may not be. We don't want to he may not be fully up to his shape, his mid-season form. I don't know.
So it's not something I'm like panicking about. But, with Arthur Smith's history, it's just something to monitor is all I'm saying. Because if Pickens all of a sudden has some unproductive weeks in which certain people are playing more than him, it's going to be a conversation point at that point when that happens. On the Falcons side, I liked a lot of what I saw out of Bijan Robinson. I thought that he was definitely a high-impact player, especially in the receiving game. It felt like last year he was not really being used much in the receiving game at all, and all of a sudden, in this game, he's got 5 receptions, which led the team, 43 yards, which is second behind Ray McLeod. Clearly, they were not able to get Drake London or Kyle Pitts that involved. Now, Kyle Pitts did have 3 catches, 26 yards, and a touchdown. So, at least in terms of fantasy production, it was a really rough week for most tight ends. And Kyle Pitts was one of the better ones because he did score that touchdown. So, that didn't impact him too much. But in terms of the actual production, the offense just wasn't able to get the ball going. And I don't necessarily blame anything specific outside of I did see that they are the only offense in the entire NFL that this week did not run a single play action. And I think that's because Kirk Cousins is coming off the injury that he is. Now, they're saying that the lack of production or Kirk struggles because he did throw the 2 picks has nothing to do with the injury. But I just don't buy that. When Kirk did you watch much of this game?
I watched the condensed version, so it only showed.
I watched a good amount because I've got Bijan, I've got Kyle Pitts, I've got like a good amount of Falcons, and then I've also got George Pickens now. I've got Justin Fields. I've got a lot of like fantasy implications that were in this game. So I had Red Zone on one monitor, and then obviously the Cowboys weren't playing during the early set, so I had this game on the other. Kirk like did not move. Like when it came to him in the pocket, he just sat there, and I really do feel like the mobility is maybe a problem because when you're playing a team like Pittsburgh that is going to want to go after the quarterback with TJ Watt, and he had a very successful day doing that, I feel like you've got to have some mobility. When you've got Bijan Robinson in this kind of a run game, you've got to work in the play action. Like, say what you want about Arthur Smith, but that was the one thing that the Falcons always did was a heavy play action. Now, they weren't great at then doing it to free up their weapons, being Kyle Pitts or Drake London, but, at least they did it a lot. And I feel like, I don't know if, considering what the Steelers are doing with Russell Wilson and Justin Fields and just like willing to take it slow, trust their defense, trust their playmakers, and, just accept what happens after that. Once again, we both felt that Michael Penix was one of the most NFL-ready prospects in this class, maybe even the most NFL-ready prospect in the class. And I'm not saying that he should be the starter over Kirk Cousins the entire season, but if Kirk literally cannot move, and that forces your offense to never run play action, considering how talented of a running back and how talented of an offensive line you have, play action is a huge weapon that Atlanta should be using. And the fact that they're not, which I think, once again, is largely because of Kirk Cousins' lack of mobility, I think that maybe they should consider just putting Penix in there for a little bit and letting Kirk heal, because I think this is severely limiting their offense, and it's just something to watch out for the next few weeks, because if the same thing happens, I would not be surprised if Atlanta continues to struggle to move the ball, because if teams know that, when you set up in certain formations, this is a pass, this is a run, guaranteed, you don't ever force them to question anything, that's tough in the modern day NFL.
Yeah, I mean, especially the point you made about TJ Watt. I mean, he even had one of the sacks. I think he had like 2 strip sacks. I think both were negated by penalties. One was legitimately a defensive holding. The other one was he actually timed it perfectly, and apparently even the ref told him at halftime, like, my bad. So we had some another line of questionable officiating, but I think that's interesting. I think a little bit too factors in, which maybe more factors in what you're saying too, is like, and I should have kind of grabbed some data, because it feels like the teams that played their starters in their preseason, I feel as like for week 1 as an overall, they had an overall higher success rate. Pittsburgh, now granted they're figuring out the quarterback situation, but Justin Fields played in the preseason. A good amount of their guys did, especially their starters. Even their, we saw their offensive line. There's that one game against the Bills that weren't great, but they got out there, and sometimes just getting those live reps, can help. So I wonder if, and obviously, Kirk's coming off that Achilles, like you mentioned. So, and even then, they didn't play Penix much in the preseason either. So, just kind of an odd handling that way of the Falcons. I think we kind of saw that there's obviously rust, and obviously Kirk in a new system as well, on top of limiting his injury. It could all, and then like we say, but like you said, and we've said, like, it's tough to play Pittsburgh in general, especially week 1, because they always do crazy unorthodox stuff, especially on defense with some of their zone blitzes. They tend to not really follow some rules sometimes, or be as technically structurally sound, and it doesn't matter because they've got away with this game, as their offense not struggled, but was very risk adverse, which I guess makes sense when you're going to hostile territory there. But nonetheless, this will be an interesting situation to monitor for the Falcons, it's one of those things that was a good observation by you, because I didn't watch the game as closely, so I didn't pick up on that. But that's obviously a big thing with Kirk, even before the injury, and now with that. So we'll see, because if you're standing in the same spot, it doesn't really matter sometimes how good your offensive line is, like you're alluding to. These pass rushers, if they know that you're going to be at that spot, they know how to get there, or make you or get disruption to get you off the spot and such. So classic Pittsburgh win here. Also, once again, shout out to Chris Boswell. I know he obviously had 6 field goals, but he also had to step in at punter too because their punter got hurt as
True.
well. So yeah, I wonder if I wonder too. Sorry, side note: if I was ever a kicker, or maybe these kickers, put in their contract, if I got a punt, I want an extra bone. Like I should be getting a little extra for that. You know what I mean? Like I'm really saving your butt right
Yeah.
now. Otherwise, who
Sure.
else you can have punt? And I'm doing double duty. So anyway, yeah, kudos to Pittsburgh. All around team effort, special teams, defense, and good enough on offense. Nothing sexy, especially offensively, but gets the job done. Speaking of getting the job done and not great offense, let's go on to the next one. It is the Chicago Bears. They get the win over the Tennessee Titans 24-17. Definitely not the debut that, not the best debut probably in plan for Caleb Williams. 14 completions, 93 yards. He was 14 for 29. But on the flip side, was not really pretty either from Will Levis. And obviously, Brian Callahan had some comments, I believe it was today or yesterday, in regards to their offense. But yeah, what are your thoughts here in regards to the Bears getting the win?
It was not pretty. I saw, some stat, which these don't mean anything, but I'm just throwing it out there. Some stat that said there's only been 2 rookie quarterbacks in their NFL debut in NFL history that have thrown the ball over 25 times and had less than 100 yards. That's Caleb Williams and Desmond Ridder. And not great company to be in, Caleb, but at the same time, it's week 1, and it's one of those ridiculous stats that I don't think really means anything. The only part that really surprised me was how inept the entire offense looked. Like, it wasn't just Caleb Williams that didn't look great, and albeit to Caleb's credit, he didn't throw any interceptions. I believe he fumbled once, but I don't think they lost that fumble. So in terms of like mistakes, he didn't really like cost them that badly, especially considering, the end result. But like DeAndre Swift couldn't get anything done on the ground. They weren't really patient on the ground game pretty much at all, because they only gave him about 10 carries. DJ Moore got one. Velus Jones Jr. got a couple. They a little bit mixed in Khalil Herbert and Travis Homer, 4 total carries for those 2 guys. But in terms of like the running backs, that was only 14 total carries that they gave those guys, despite it being a close game. So I feel like they could have been maybe a little more patient in terms of using the running backs that way. But yeah, the passing attack couldn't really get anything done. DJ Moore and Keenan Allen both heavily featured, 5 catches for DJ Moore, 4 for Keenan Allen. 8 and 11 targets for those 2 guys respectively. It was just they couldn't really do anything with it, quite frankly. Because 36 yards and 29 yards was the production result. So, yeah, the passing game wasn't there. The run game wasn't there. The offense just couldn't move the ball. But at the very least, they weren't really costing their team the ball that much. Now, they did fumble 3 times, but they only lost one of those. And then even on the other side of the ball, they recovered their own fumble, and the defense went crazy. So, yeah, weird game. I don't know how the Titans managed to lose that when you're up 17-0 at one point. And somehow, some way, despite the other team not being able to score an offensive touchdown, you lose. The Titans offense needs to reevaluate the way they handled that game, because that should have been a gimme considering the circumstances. Even Rome Odunze, I think, got an MCL sprain or something like that. So even he was injured, so they had less of their playmakers ready to go. Very questionable result for Tennessee. And for Chicago, you're happy that you won. We're not necessarily encouraged by the way that you won, but if you can win those kind of ugly games, then it's only a matter of time until the offense does start clicking, until the run game starts going, until DJ Moore and Keenan Allen and Caleb Williams really start to make things happen in the air. And once that happens, who knows what Chicago could do. I was even someone who necessarily doubted them coming into the season, didn't feel like they were going to live up to the hype of like everybody picking them to be a playoff team already. But if they can win those kind of ugly games, very Pittsburgh-esque kind of win, then who knows what they could do.
Yeah. One thing on the Bears offense, you kind of hit everything out very well. I think they need to be a little more aggressive with Caleb. It seemed like they were very, very conservative. There's only one kind of deep, like aggressive deep shot that they really had, and that was, fortunately, Caleb missed Keenan Allen. I'm sure you remember that, or you saw that, remember that play. Other than that, there wasn't a lot of play action, aggression, things like that. And maybe that's something they got into Caleb's head, or maybe Caleb got in his own head. I don't know. But it was a lot of just little dink and dunk. Let's just, like you said, be safe, be conservative with the ball. And I mean, luckily it worked out for them because to mainly go to my main point on the other side, I mean, it was really just Tennessee. Not to take anything away from the Bears, but Tennessee lost this game. I mean, the last
Yeah.
4 possessions in the fourth quarter, crunch time, fumble, interception, punt, and then obviously that other interception. And then obviously one of those interceptions, horrible. I mean, and then there's people are memeing it already, but I mean, Will pump fakes to the left, and yeah, pressure happens, and then he tries to like underhand dump it, like throw it back to that same guy when
Yeah,
that
that was
corner
bad.
already jumped and bit on the pump fake. That you pump fake to, like if you pump fake to a guy, you don't throw right back to the pump fake. I just and especially because he tossed the lollipop. Yeah, like pick six. Like you gave the Bears this an easy. You just helped them out, literally helped them out, and obviously he knows that, and that's why Brian Callahan was probably very critical of that. And to be fair, like
And I will
go
say
ahead.
too, helped me out considering I picked up the Bears defense in our fantasy
Yeah.
league and they put up 27 points and I won by less than that.
Yeah,
So
and then obviously too, Tennessee was a little bit buoyed by the fact that the Bears muffed one of the opening kickoffs too in the second
yeah.
open the second quarter is bad, so it just bounced off Velus Jones and straight to like 15 yards over to Tennessee, and even then they only got a field goal off that. They probably should have capitalized more off of that anyway. But only other thing I want to add on Levis, and once again, we knew him coming out, he was kind of a raw prospect. That's why he kind of fell in the draft, why he didn't get the job, really until this year, or late last year as well. But still got to see him have a little more clubs in his throwing bag. It seems like he's very Josh Allen-ish and some of these other gifts athletic quarterbacks where he's just gonna throw lasers, and he's really good at the vertical, north south routes. Not really great at the anticipation routes where hey maybe you got to throw it over people or put it in a spot and throw with anticipation. And granted, maybe that may be something that comes along with time for him as he gets more comfortable in the system. But yeah, not a great start for Tennessee, or at least not a great finish to the game. Because like I said, they were in command for majority of the game, especially in the first half, and then just some self-inflicted wounds, also some fumbles as well. They lost the fumble. I think Levis also lost the fumble as well on his end. So,
Yeah.
just gotta obviously two young teams, so it makes sense why there's a lot of ugly mistakes and such, and just not great football in general. So, we'll see how both these young quarterbacks move forward from some ugly performances to say the least. But anyhow, let's go on over to an AFC matchup in between the Dolphins, where the Dolphins prevailed over the Jacksonville Jaguars. Talk about another comeback here. Dolphins win 20-17. This one went down to the wire, John. Very similar to the other game where Jaguars were in command for a good portion of this game, but it's the NFL. You leave a door open, and the other team took it. What were your thoughts here?
Yeah, man, it pains me because Travis Etienne on my fantasy team, he had that unfortunate fumble. It could have been a touchdown, should have been a touchdown. Gets peanut punched if he just holds onto the ball there. He definitely, considering the way that Javon Holland was not committing to the tackle, he was very much committing to the turnover. If you just hold onto the ball there, you definitely muscle your way into that end zone. It really felt like you talked about how Tennessee sort of lost that game. I'm not going to say the exact same thing about Jacksonville, but pretty close, if we're going to be real. Pretty close, because if Travis Etienne scores that touchdown, I believe at that point they would have gone up, I think it would have been 24 to... I can't remember the exact score. Hold on. Let me just look up the play-by-play of when that exact moment was. Where was
I think
the
it was
fumble?
right before
Fumble
the
there.
because then
It would have been 24-7. And at that point, considering that it was already the fourth quarter, there's only, I don't know, 10 minutes or so left in the game, 24-7. Sure, they are the Dolphins, and if any team can make big plays happen, as we then see with Tyreek, it would be the Dolphins. But at the same time, 24-7, that's a tough thing to come back from as long as you can just continue to run the ball, which they did do effectively with Tank Bigsby and Etienne. So it really felt like Jacksonville, specifically Etienne, kind of blew their opportunity there, and then the defense just did not hold up like they were holding up the entire game as Tyreek Hill gets that 180-yard touchdown, and then from there, that just sort of breathed life into Miami because then, they get the ball back later. I think, what was it? They the Jags fumble again?
So they scored the
PG Washington got
touchdown.
19 yards.
So they lost. Jacksonville turned it over on downs because they couldn't
Uh-huh.
convert a 4th and 1. Miami ironically missed that field goal, and then Jacksonville punted and went 3-and-out, and then Miami hit a field goal, and then Jacksonville went 3-and-out one more time. That was their last offensive possession, and then Miami. But at the time, it was tied, and then Miami went and scored the final field goal and just ate up the clock.
Yeah, so I mean, literally, now I'm looking at it too. They have that 94-yard drive, which ends in the ETN fumble. Then they go for it on downs. Like you said, ETN couldn't get the 4th down conversion on 4th and 1, which even before that, it was 3rd and 1. Tank Bigsby couldn't get the conversion there either. He got 0 yards. So back-to-back plays in which either running back couldn't get it. Then Miami gives you a chance. They miss the field goal, and what do? You go 4-and-out again. Then you allow Miami to drive down 73 yards, get the field goal. Then you, once again, punt because of multiple sacks in which, and on those, you can kind of blame Trevor Lawrence, but like the offensive line did not hold up. Miami just got there instantly, and so they punt again, and then once again you allow Miami to drive down the field. So I don't know. It really felt like Jacksonville had the game in the bag, and they just kind of threw it away and gave it to Miami late. It really felt like they should have won this game. And if ETN scores that touchdown there, maybe that completely changes the shift of momentum because he fumbles, 80-yard touchdown, boom, Miami has life. And what should have been 24-7 is now 17-14, and all they need is a field goal to tie, and they're in this game. So, yeah, ugly game from the Jacksonville. I also felt like Trevor Lawrence in the passing attack was not nearly as impressive as I was hoping it would be, considering the state of the Miami defense. There's a lot of question marks on this Miami defense when it comes to the secondary, apart from Jalen Ramsey, but even Ramsey didn't have one of the greatest of games. Even the pass rush didn't really get there until the end when they had those 2 sacks. Before that, they only had 1 through the entire game. So, yeah, man, I don't know. It really felt like Jacksonville should have came out with a 1-0 record here, and they weren't able to get it done. And that's despite the fact that, defensively, like I said, for most of the game, even like realistically, they got those 2 field goal drives, but one of them was only a 30-yard drive. The other one was a 73-yard drive. So it's like that 73-yard drive was kind of the only real drive that Miami had to make in the entire second half. Like, they had their one right before halftime where they had the 12-yard, 70-yard drive, which resulted in the Achane touchdown. But other than that, they were punting, 3-and-outs, all this kind of stuff, missed field goals, whatever. And then they have that one 80-yard touchdown. So, like, Jacksonville's defense was so strong through most of the game, and they only really gave up, like, 2 strong drives, one of which resulted in a touchdown, one of which resulted in a field goal, and you kind of take that, and then they just give up that 180-yard touchdown, and it's just kind of a heartbreaker because I really felt like so much of what Jacksonville did was right, and just basically like the fumble and the 80-yard touchdown was kind of like the 2 mistakes, and that cost them the game.
Yeah, I mean, I think sometimes the NFL, just to kind of expand on your point, this goes to show, like, the NFL, you can be the better team for majority of the game, but sometimes just, you make a couple mistakes, couple, plays, and you still lose. So because just to really add on, I don't have much else to add to what you said, but I do want to shout out, like, Brian Thomas, really good game. I know he had 4 for 47, but he also set up another touchdown with a PI on Ramsey, which he had beaten Ramsey. He had to step on him. So that was encouraging, at least to see. But maybe this, like I said, it is encouraging that the Jacksonville defense was able to step up for most of the day. It's just, obviously they had a few breaks. And that was without Tyson Campbell, by the way. I guess he got hurt at some point. So, we'll see. That might affect their defense going forward, obviously. But we'll see, obviously how they bounce back. Because that's a tough one to do sometimes as well. Sometimes those losses can turn into 2 where, like I said, you knew you were the better team majority of the day, and you were winning majority of the day, but then, it's kind of slipped through your fingers, for a lack of a better phrase. Especially against the other team within your state and in your conference as well. So, good gritty win for Miami. Something they didn't really have a lot of last year. And granted, it's still early, so we'll see if they can pull this off in the colder months. But nonetheless, crucial win for them as they go to 1-0, obviously, and then Jacksonville got some pieces to pick up and got to regroup going into week 2 after that tough one. But they aren't the only team that's going to be seriously looking at themselves trying to regroup going into week 2. as we're going on to the next game. The Cincinnati Bengals will be doing that as they go. They're at home. People like I just want to provide a little bit of context. People like myself, I'm not sure I'm not the only one. If we have if you do survivor pools, I was adding context. I won my survivor pool 2 years ago at work. Last year I got knocked out week 1 because I went a little brash. I picked the Rams to lose against the Seahawks. If people remember last year, and they did not. They beat the Seahawks. And so this year I was like, I'm gonna be a little bit careful. I'm gonna go with the Patriots to lose, because we all know that in theory their offense wasn't great, but nonetheless Bengals dropped the ball here. Patriots get the big win for Gerard Mayo, 16-10, and very much like some of these other games. I mean, this wasn't a very offensive week, just to say the least. As defense kind of ruled the day, and it definitely did so in this one. What were your thoughts here, John?
Cincinnati with the slow starts, they do it again. And this one, just offensively, they really couldn't do anything. Like, and it's surprising too, because the game was close and it really felt like they should have ran the ball more. Zach Moss had 9 carries for 44 yards and a touchdown. That's 4.9 yards per carry. Now, he did have one of those was a 16-yard carry, so it wasn't as efficient, once again, as the stats make it seem. But still, at the end of the day, like, he was largely really efficient and, did solid on the ground. Even Chase Brown, he only got 3 carries for 11 yards. So, I don't know. It felt like they should have ran the ball more. The Joe Burrow, he was 21-29, so it's not like he was necessarily missing throws or anything, but the pass attack just wasn't quite there. Like, New England they played sound defense. They didn't allow them to get many big plays. Christian Gonzalez, shout out to this man, because when he was guarding Jamar Chase, Jamar, I think, had 3 catches for 11 yards. So Jamar's other 3 catches was, for about 50 yards when he was not on Gonzalez. So Gonzalez had a heck of a game. But, even though they were missing T. Higgins, like, there's really no excuse for Cincinnati to lose this game, because in terms of talent, they were definitely the superior team, and yet they weren't able to come out on top. I don't know what it is. I'm not going to overreact and say that Cincinnati's bad, because we've seen them do this before. But this is definitely not an encouraging result. And if you're Cincinnati, you definitely have to go back to the drawing board, because it's surprising that they were able to lose this game, especially considering that, it's New England, and New England wasn't really able to do much in the passing attack. It was just kind of Ramondre Stevenson. Like, that was really the only thing that killed them. It was very clear that New England was going to just run the ball. That's all they wanted to do. And yet still, Cincinnati wasn't able to do anything about it. And on the offensive side was completely inept.
Yeah. Obviously, the turnovers didn't help. There's that one fumble right at the one that the Bengals had at the end of the first half. That was kind of a backbreaker, because that was literally at least a 6-point swing. Maybe they get the field goal, but they probably scored the touchdown there. But instead, obviously, New England gets the ball back. They eat up the rest of the clock for the rest of the half, because, like you mentioned, they just ran the heck out of the air out of the ball, and they later did that to get a field goal. And then Cincinnati doesn't get the ball back. And then what was even tough too was, Cincinnati, to open up the second half, they get the 3 and out, because New England, got the ball in the second half. Get the 3 and out, New England, and then they muff the punt. And then and then now New England's up 13-0, and then the Bengals are just behind the 8 ball from there. So that is a concern. You mentioned that Ramondre Stevenson has able to be productive and basically just run the air of the ball. Could be a very big concern for them going forward. Something we mentioned in our preseason overview was losing a guy like DJ Reader. He was gone for the last half of last year. Now, granted, they were a mess last half of last season, so I at least kind of threw that a little bit out the window, but still very concerning, especially considering next week they got Kansas City. So, like I said, you got to pick up the pieces quick here, and we'll see the status of Higgins. And I think it's and it's fair to say too, like, was Jamar Chase? I don't know his snap count, but it felt like he was definitely on some sort of snap limit, because obviously he missed time and most of the preseason due to the contract stuff. So, and once again, I'm not blaming Jamar really for that. That's really on the organization. That's one of the reasons why you try to get that done, so you can get your guy in the building. And it just feels like that would have been a point of emphasis. It's like, hey, let's get our guys figured out so that we can get off to a better start than we have the past few years, because that's kind of been the bane of their existence. And yet here we are. So, we'll have to see. And also too, like, their offense I worry about their creativity too. Because there was even like a 4th and 2. on downs where like it was like a little like swing pass they threw to I may be mispronouncing his name, but Iacivas or
Yeah.
and like it wasn't doing like New England was all over that. So that is one thing too I want to credit, like we had mentioned too in that preseason breakdown, was that hey, this New England defense still pretty good, still talented. Like I know that we all know the offense is a bit of a mess, but hey, like they're playing to their strengths. Be a defensive team. Jacoby Brissett to take care of the ball, and he did for the most. He did absolutely no turnovers for him. It wasn't an absolutely sexy day, but like we said, got the job done, and yeah, they get the big win. So we'll see if it maybe this will impact though their whoever people are tanking for. But yeah, New England upsetting the Bengals was definitely not on the bingo card for many of us, and we'll see how Cincinnati bounces back. Going against Kansas City next week. I'm not sure who New England faces, but nonetheless, I'm sure New England fans are very happy the fact that they ran out with the win here in Cincinnati as well, which is just adds on top of the shock. So let's move on over to another AFC matchup, the Houston Texans. This was a more exciting game. It was one of the few offensive games as the Texans beat the Indianapolis Colts 29-27. We kind of saw this. You saw the Texans live up to the hype in a sense, especially their offense here, John. What were your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, this was a fun game to watch. C.J. Stroud versus Anthony Richardson. Richardson actually had a solid performance. He had a lot of electric plays. Now, I will say he was 9 of 19, so in terms of the completion percentage, it wasn't great. And even in terms of his yards, over half of it came on 2 throws. One was a 60-yarder to Alec Pierce, and the other was a 54-yarder to Ashton Doolin, both of which resulted in touchdowns. Otherwise, their pass attack was pretty lackluster. They ran the ball a lot with Jonathan Taylor, weren't able to have much success on the ground game. He did get a touchdown, but otherwise 16 carries for only 48 yards. Richardson also was running around, but I won't lie, it definitely made me wince every time that man would just like dive into somebody and take some huge hit, because that was happening a lot. With Anthony Richardson's history, it scares me a little bit that he might be, the physical style of play that he has this early in the season might result in a potential injury. Knock on wood, I'm not asking for that to happen, but it just seems like the way he's playing like Cam Newton did. And, when you're as fast as he is, as big as he is, like I don't blame him, but he just unfortunately doesn't have the durability that Cam had, at least currently in his career. So let's hope he can make it through the whole season, because I will say he was definitely exciting to watch, even though it was somewhat of a limited sample size in terms of the throwing. On the other side, Houston, man, they were able to do kind of whatever they wanted, which is not surprising. This is why we thought that the Texans were going to kind of blow the brakes off the Colts. Now, the Colts actually were able to relatively keep up for the most part, which, shout out to the Colts for that, because I definitely did not see that coming. But at the same time, their defense is definitely a concern. Joe Mixon, 30 carries for 159 yards and a touchdown. He absolutely dominated them on the ground. C.J. Stroud was able to do whatever he wanted. Now, he did get sacked 4 times, which I did not think was going to happen. So that's maybe a bright spot for the Colts. But even despite the sacks and the pressures, 24-32, 234 yards, 2 touchdowns, 0 picks. Nico Collins had a heck of a day. Tank Dell, he was involved. Stephon Diggs had 2 touchdowns. So they got all 3 of their receivers going. And, so the game largely went the way that we thought it would, outside of the fact that Indy was actually able to keep up. But it was an offensive affair. And, it was an exciting game. Good win for the Texans. And if you're a Colts fan, I'll be honest, I would say this was an encouraging result offensively, because I definitely did not think they had the juice to keep up with a team like Houston, especially considering the state of their defense.
Yeah, I want to add, you mentioned that where most of his yards came from. Also, Alec Pierce, he went for 125. One of his other receptions was a 57-yarder. So technically, 171 of the 212 passing yards came off 3 completions. And granted, so it'll be interesting to see. That's obviously not probably viable going forward. So we'll see if,
right,
like you're alluding to, I think Richardson's definitely one of those, like Levis, these young quarterbacks that have great athleticism. Where, it'd be interesting to see if he can learn to throw with a little more anticipation and such, and the more intermediate routes, more crossing routes as opposed to the vertical. Because we saw, man, he can throw those vertical routes great, and he's got the guys that do that. But obviously, teams will probably adjust to that going forward. And I did have the same thought as you. And I even had this for Will Levis, but especially more for Richardson, where it's like, side more, buddy. Like sometimes you just got. Like, I love the fight, like you're saying, love the competitiveness. Obviously, he has the physical ability to do it. But you mentioned Cam Newton. There's a reason why, this Cam only had his prime was great, but it wasn't that long. It was only like 3 or 4 years. Even New England, like by then, he wasn't. He was obviously somewhat still a great athlete, but even as you saw, it wore down quick, and like even Josh Allen. I mean, I think Josh Allen's probably the best example where even sometimes Josh Allen toes that line very well sometimes of knowing when to try to be hurdle guys and run through people, and then when to slide as well. So we'll see. That's something that they try to get more into Richardson, and I understand though because that's the way that's one of the reasons why he drafted him. But hopefully he needs more playing time. He needs to stay healthy. So hopefully that's something they can drill into him. And then Texans, scary that now they have good balance. This would be going. Obviously, we got to keep seeing it, more sample size. But like you mentioned, I mean, their offense, if they can have a consistent run game, which I will give credit to Slowick. They've been patient with it in years past. Obviously, they haven't had all the weapons they have now, but now that they have these, Stephon Diggs, and now people know about Nico Collins and Tank Dell, and obviously how good CJ Stroud is. Like, it's gonna be interesting how you defend this team if they're gonna be patient with the run game like they were on this day. And they do have talent on that offensive line, like we've mentioned before. And for the most part, they stayed healthy. And I'm not too concerned. They get sacked 4 times. It could be just a week 1 thing where, hey, the offensive line needs to still get in the groove of, handling these defensive linemen going forward. But we'll see, how these 2 teams progress. Tough loss for the Colts, though, just in terms of the fact that was at Indianapolis. So next time they play will be in Houston later in the year, obviously. But let's go on back to the NFC. This one will be pretty cut and dry, as this game was pretty much over pretty quickly too, as the Minnesota Vikings beat the New York Giants 28-6. Another poor performance by a guy that we've been not just us, but been under a lot of scrutiny, and Daniel Jones. But what are your thoughts here in regards to the Vikings just putting the beat down on the Giants?
I'm not surprised at all what I saw from the Giants. I mean, Malik Neighbors in his first career game led the team in receiving yards. No surprise there. And at the same time, in the post-game interview, they're asking him about Daniel Jones, and he's quoted saying, "I don't know what's going on back there." Listen, man, I've said it for years. I was incredibly critical of the fact that they re-signed him for $40 million a year. And I know that like the salaries are only going up, and all of a sudden Dak just got a $60 million contract and blah, blah, blah. So like $40 million is kind of like not great money in terms of the QB market at this point. But at the same time, man, like it's been so clear to me that Daniel Jones has not been the answer for years, man. Like the fact that the year that everybody praised him when they made the playoffs that one season, he threw like 13 touchdowns, but everybody's praising him because they only threw 5 picks. It's like, sure, like you threw less turnovers, but that really felt like Dayball was so much relying on Saquon Barkley in the run game and basically telling Daniel Jones, I'd rather you just take the sack, throw the ball out of bounds, just don't attempt anything. Just don't try to be risky because we know that you can't do it. And that's kind of what happens. He was sacked 5 times, and once again, the offensive line there hasn't been great, but I also think that he's just got terrible pocket presence. He didn't even complete 50% of his passes, and he threw 2 interceptions, 0 touchdowns, couldn't get 200 yards. Like, he's just not a difference maker. He's not a playmaker, and I don't understand why he is still the Giants' starting quarterback. I'm going to be real. I don't think that he's a starting quarterback in the NFL, and I think that they should start to look to move on because, quite frankly, this is not going to get easier. The Vikings was supposed to be your easy game because they don't have their starting quarterback. They traded away some of their top defensive guys, like even some of the guys they still do have, like a Harrison Smith. He's only getting older, and so how impactful can some of these guys be? We don't really know, and yet all of a sudden you're getting sacked 2 times by Pat Jones II. You're getting sacked by Harrison Phillips. You're getting sacked by Dallas Turner. You're turning the ball over multiple times, throwing those 2 interceptions. It's like, what are we doing? What are we doing? And I will say, shout out to Andrew Van Ginkel, because that 1 interception he had was an incredible play. I'll cut some slack to Daniel Jones because that was just a designed screen, I
Yeah.
believe, and Van Ginkel just yoinked that thing. So I'm not going to say that that one was all on Jones. Now, I'm not going to say that Jones, once again, deserves a lot of flack because, he was not a difference maker on the game, and they're having to throw these little dinky screen passes because Jones can't really do anything. The Harrison Smith interception is definitely on Jones. But yeah, like this was supposed to be your easy game. You got to go play the Philly defense. You've got to go play the Dallas defense. You've got a tough schedule where it's just not going to get easier. And this was supposed to be a relatively easy game. And even though I still picked the Vikings to win it, this was supposed to be one that at the very least was going to be close, and it wasn't. And I think it's only a matter of time, quite frankly, until Daniel Jones is benched. I think that at some point they might try the Drew Lock thing and see what happens there. And yeah, I think that the Giants, like I said in my preseason prediction, I think that there is a realistic scenario in which the Giants are picking number 1 overall next year.
And to your credit, too, I mean, we both were, but I mean, in this draft process, we kind of saw it in the Hard Knocks. They were looking at other quarterbacks. They kind of have been already. So it's like they are. It seems like they're maybe a little bit aware of, that this isn't it. We got to try to look for an alternative. Yeah, I mean, only thing I want to add was on the Van Ginkel one. I mean, great just instincts by Van Ginkel because he obviously is supposed to be. And I think, you kind of hit the point. I feel like that should be on the old lineman. I feel like most of the time, the old lineman, you're told to attack or at least cut out their legs. It just felt like whoever their tackle just, I don't know. But once again, that could be week 1 stuff. But nonetheless, only thing I want to add was also like their secondary. I mean, and no offense to Sam Darnold. Obviously, he's a first-round pick. He's had talent, and this is probably the most talent he's had around him. But man, like at one point, wasn't he like 12 for 12 or something? Regardless, he was 19 for 24.
Yeah, he was cooking.
Like for the most part, wherever he was looking, when he was throwing, it was hitting the guy. So that's also a concern for the Giants. Will be that secondary because really, and we mentioned in our preseason too, like outside of Deontay Banks, in that secondary, like anyone really like inspire you really much? Not really. Not a lot of huge difference makers there. So, yeah, and even to add to the point of their struggles, I mean, 3 of their points came off of a fumble that was right outside of the red zone, and they couldn't convert that to a touchdown. And, maybe that would have led to different momentum. So, the Giants got a lot of issues to iron out. And like you said, I mean, Vikings, they get this huge win on the road. Aaron Jones looks solid, too. Obviously, the big thing with him is just staying healthy. So, good for him. He did pretty well, and Justin Jefferson had some great plays as well. So we'll see, if the Vikings can maybe keep this momentum, sneak up on a couple other teams. But yeah, a lot of concerns in New York, and it's going on now, so they got to figure this out as the season goes on and adjust. So we'll see if they can do so, and obviously what happens with Daniel Jones, because like you said, this is it. Like I know we've kind of said it, but this feels definitely like this is it, because like we said, they were already looking at quarterbacks this offseason. It seems like they were really interested heavily in some of them. So
yeah, they really wanted Drake May, I think, from the reports.
Apparently, so yeah. Anyhow, let's go on over to New Orleans. This one will be really cut and dry as the Saints just dominated the Panthers 47-10. Definitely not the start to the David Canales regime that the Panthers wanted, and definitely not the start they wanted, especially for their offense, as Bryce Young did not have a great day. Let's just put that simple. So what were your thoughts, if any, here?
There was nothing the Panthers did right. Let's just be frank. Derek Carr, I mean, the offseason reports are that, Saints fans are wanting to move on from Derek Carr. Like, Spencer Rattler is making noise in camp, and maybe they should consider him because we don't like Derek Carr. Guy threw for 3 touchdowns, 200 yards, 19 of 23 on completion percentage. Like, he only got sacked one time. Like, Derek Carr did it all. Alvin Kamara was able to be efficient. All the critiques of him, like he's averaging 5 yards a carry in this game, was able to get a touchdown as well. Jamal Williams got a touchdown. Taysom Hill had an impact on the ground. Like, Rashid Shaheed had a long touchdown. Foster Moreau got a touchdown. Literally, whatever the Saints wanted to do, they could do. And I don't think it's because the Saints are necessarily an elite football team. It's because the Panthers suck, and they're going to continue to suck this year. Yeah. Bryce Young, I'm going to be real. I've fully given up. I don't know. Like, usually I give quarterbacks till their second season, around like halfway through the year, because I think that, your rookie year, you can kind of excuse a lot of things. But once again, similar to what the Giants I just said about them, things are not going to get easier. The Saints was not supposed to be one of the most difficult games that you should have all year, and you just got blown out 47-10. Bryce Young couldn't complete 50% of his passes. He had 2 interceptions. He only had 160 yards. He's not a very mobile guy, so in the run game, he's not like going to be impactful there. In general, they were not patient with the run whatsoever. They ran Miles Sanders 5 times for 22 yards. He's averaging over 4 yards a carry. Keep running the ball. I know that you're down big time, but like clearly the offense, you can't move it through the air. Jonathan Mingo was their second leading receiver, and that's crazy because Jonathan Mingo is not even that great of a receiver. So I don't know. It legit feels like there's nothing the Panthers could do right in this one, and I just don't have a lot of hope for their future. And I know that I just mentioned that we could see a realistic scenario in which the Giants are picking number 1 overall next year. Well, the only thing that might stop them is the Carolina Panthers being even worse. So, yeah, that's all I have to say about that.
Yeah, tough. They lost Derek Brown, their defensive tackle. He's on IR.
Yeah.
After that game, who knows how long he'll be out. So that adds to those odds. I don't have much else to say. I do want to add, I've also been a little bit critical of Derek Carr, especially his lack of aggressiveness the past few years. And yeah, just a contrast though, because I mean, yeah, literally their first touchdown was that 59-yard bomb to Rashid Shaheed, and he's just letting it rip. So granted, it's week 1. Maybe as the season settles in, sometimes guys go back to their old habits, and maybe he'll go back to being a little bit conservative. Who knows? But nonetheless, for this game, I'll give him his flowers. Came out throwing like you mentioned. And obviously, it opened up the whole offense. And like, even though Chris Olave had a pedestrian day, like it didn't matter because they won. So it makes sense because like they were already up like 30-3 at half. So it's like, oh well, sorry, Chris. Like I'm sure Chris was fine with that because like yeah, we're winning big. I don't need to do much today. So yeah, it'd be interesting to see if the Saints keep up this dominance. And obviously, a very good. Probably the dream start you want in regards to just dominating, especially a division rival, whoever it may be, to start off the season. So. Huge win there for the Saints, and yeah, just taking care of business really against the Panthers. Well, yeah, we'll see if the Panthers can regroup somehow, if possible. But like we mentioned in our preseason breakdowns, just doesn't feel that way with the talent that they have. But anyhow, let's go on down to the last, but not least, early game of Sunday, and that was the Buffalo Bills. They also were down 14 in the first half, but they came back to beat the Cardinals 34-28 here. What were your thoughts in regards to this game, John?
I actually thought the Cardinals looked a lot better than I thought they would. I expected the Bills to, have a really dominant victory. The one concerning thing for the Cardinals was that although we got the run game going, Kyler Murray was doing good. James Conner was, doing what he does. He's not the most efficient back, but he's a ground and pound kind of guy. Similar issue that we saw last year, which is that Kyler Murray not really able or willing to get the outside receivers involved. Michael Wilson, 1 catch for 5 yards and a touchdown. Marvin Harrison Jr., 1 catch for 4 yards. 5 total targets between the two. Meanwhile, Trey McBride sucking up 9 targets. Greg Dortch from the slot sucking up 8. James Conner, Amari DiMercado getting 6 total targets between the two. Even Trey Benson gets 1. So, like, it's a lot of underneath stuff. It's a lot of over the middle stuff. And it's weird because Kyler Murray used to throw on the outside all the time back when they had DeAndre Hopkins. And so I don't know if it's a scheme thing. I don't know if it's a Kyler thing, but they certainly need to get Marvin Harrison Jr. more involved. They need to get Michael Wilson more involved as he's developing in year 2, because you just spent a super high draft pick on Marvin Harrison Jr. And, I know he was wide open at the very end of the game for the touchdown, but it just seems like Kyler wasn't really looking that way for most of the game, and they got to figure out ways to make that happen because, like I said, although they looked a lot better than I thought they would in this one, like they got the kick return touchdown, Josh Allen lost the fumble, and so like there were certain things that kind of went their way that definitely helped when it comes to making the game closer than it was, and I don't know if those things are going to be consistent, and so. Yeah, I'm not freaking out. Marvin Harrison Jr. is not a bust. Oh my gosh, Kyler can't get him involved. No, it's week 1. These kind of things happen. They got to go back to the drawing board, figure out ways to get him involved because, he's supposed to be your top receiver. And when Greg Dortch is sucking up 8 targets, Greg Dortch did his thing. I'm not trying to say he didn't, but we should definitely see maybe a flip in terms of those numbers where Marvin Harrison Jr. is not getting less targets than James Conner is.
Yeah. Only other thing I want to add is like I mentioned like a little bit of like how the NFL situational football, kudos to the Bills. I mean, they did the old double dip, kind of like I mentioned Cincinnati kind of failed to do. or had the opportunity to, where Buffalo, they were down 14, but they scored at the end of the half to make it 17-10. And then obviously they get the ball coming out second half, score. All of a sudden, it's game on. And I think like a little bit you're alluding to, Arizona's offense came out to the hot start, but then all of a sudden they haven't been out for 30, 40 minutes. And then obviously you have a few new pieces. I think we kind of saw that they hit that wall per se. And we'll see, I guess, how they adjust going forward. Because, yeah, second half was a stark contrast where it was a struggle for them. I mean, they had, like I said, 7 of those points came off of that kick return for them. So, so they score another touchdown. I'm trying to pull up this thing. I'm trying to remember in the second half outside of that. But regardless,
you're talking about the Bills or the Cardinals?
Cardinals, excuse me, because I know the Cardinals, like I said, scored the
Cardinals scored the
kickoff,
kick return, and the field goal. That was it.
Oh, so only had 10 points. Okay, so there you go. They got the 2-point conversion. That's why my math's weird, because I'm like, how do they get 11? Okay, yeah. So there you go. All right, well, but yeah, for the Bills, I mean, it was just Josh Allen show again. We'll see if they can get a couple more of their guys involved, but nonetheless, like, it was enough to win the game. It feels like this is the way that they're probably going to win most of these games. With, like we mentioned, it's a little bit lesser talent around Josh Allen, especially skill-wise, or at least youth there. And then their defense is still a little bit of an enigma. I know Greg Rousseau had 3 sacks, but it feels like Greg Rousseau always gets off to a hot start, and then like we don't, he kind of cools off towards the end of the year. It always feels like it happens, or right. Especially with the Bills. So we'll see if he can keep that up. All right, Von Miller also had a sack, so good Von Miller signing. So maybe he can come along for them as well. But crucial win for Buffalo. Tough loss for the Cardinals, as another game where, like I said, first half they were dominating for the most part, but so you got to play full 60 minutes. But anyhow, let's go to the afternoon games. Going to the LA Chargers, another new head coach winning his debut in Jim Harbaugh, as the Chargers win 22-10 over the Las Vegas Raiders. We saw an old friend kind of come back, and J.K. Dobbins, as he had a kind of return party coming off those Achilles, and I think he also had that knee patellar tendon or something as well. 2 really bad injuries for a running back. So he looked very like his old self, for a lack of a better phrase here. But what were your thoughts in regards to the Chargers getting the win?
Chargers look good. I don't know if J.K. Dobbins is going to be getting 135 yards on 10 carries every week, but it was definitely a great week for him. He looked like he had some of his old explosiveness back. Now, he did seem to tire out a little bit at the end of that 61-yard run, so maybe not quite as spry as he was as a rookie, but definitely good to see J.K. Dobbins kind of back in form, considering how long it's been, and I definitely hope that he can kind of be like one of those fantasy darlings where everybody wasn't believing in him. He just kind of continues the whole year. That'd be really cool to see for him. And it definitely worked for the Chargers, because that was their game plan. We're going to run the ball. They committed to it. J.K. had 10 carries. Gus Edwards had 11. Even Darius Davis got in the mix. He had 2. So they were committed to running it. Ran it 27 total times. Meanwhile, Herbert threw it 26 times. A very balanced attack on that side of the ball. And for Herbert, was not under duress pretty much at all. The addition of Joe Alt definitely made a difference, because that man allowed 0 pressures when Max Crosby was going against him. Joe Alt had a heck of a day, and Herbert was only sacked 1 time on the whole day. So really wasn't asked to do too much, wasn't asked to really carry them like he has been in the past. And, he only had 144 yards and a touchdown, but was able to get a lot of his young playmakers involved. Ladd McConkey obviously led the team in receiving yards. It was only 39, but he got that touchdown as well for 7 targets. We had a Quentin Johnston sighting, 2 catches for 22 yards in the first quarter. He only had 1 catch for another 16 yards the rest of the day, but second most targets on the team. So maybe Quentin Johnston, after, the whole thought of, he's going to be a backup. They're going to have DJ Chark maybe stealing some of those routes. DJ Chark didn't even get targeted, which I don't know. Did he play?
He actually got hurt. I think he had been dealing with an injury that actually just put him on IR as a DJ Chark owner. So it's going to be Quentin Johnston's time for a bit.
So Quentin Johnston getting a chance to maybe prove himself, and he was only 1 yard behind Ladd McConkey for the team lead. Once again, it was a low passing attack day, so I'm not going to sit here and say that Quentin Johnston necessarily showed a whole lot, but at the very least, he was involved. And, I think the one surprising thing for me for the Chargers was the lack of Josh Palmer. I think that that'll probably change and Palmer will get more involved as things go on. But then even on, the defensive side, the Chargers showed out. They only allowed 10 points. They pretty much completely stifled the Raiders' run game. They recovered 2 fumbles, one from Minshew, one from Zamir White. So, yeah, the Chargers, heck of a debut for Harbaugh, and I think this is the kind of football that they want to play, and if they can keep it up throughout the year, who knows? Maybe the Chargers can exceed expectations because it really felt like the Chargers might be last in this division, depending on how things go, considering a lot of the changes and, not the most improvements on the defensive side. But once again, they look good in this game overall. For the Raiders, couldn't get the run game going pretty much at all. Madison and Zamir White, both pretty ineffective. The passing attack was okay. Minshew was largely effective through the air, but it just wasn't quite enough because they weren't able to turn these into consistent drives. The one thing that I was really encouraged by for the Raiders was Brock Bowers had a really great start, led the team in targets with 6 catches for 58 yards. So clearly he's already off to a hot start for them, and I feel like if he can continue to do that as they Devontae starts to heat up, Jacoby Myers obviously is a key contributor. Maybe they start to figure out the run game, and maybe they don't play a tackle duo like the Chargers have, so Max Crosby can get more disruptive on the defensive side. Then I feel like the Raiders might be all right. So no need to overreact if you're a Raiders fan, but definitely not a great loss considering the rivalry.
Yeah, the only thing I want to add is be very interesting to see the quarterback situation going forward. Not that Minshew was horrible, but you saw some mistakes. He had the interception.
Yeah.
And then he fumbled.
Lost the fumble,
and then
too.
even Zamir White lost the fumble. So then I know that running back, they're kind of having that running back, I'll say competition, but that Alexander Madison had a solid day right behind Zamir White. So that may be something that they have to reconfigure. We'll see how they do going forward. But yeah, it's not much else to take away. I mean, this is typical Jim Harbaugh. Even Damian Pierce, like both these teams, is the way that this game was going to be played was who was going to make the least mistakes, and boom, like we just listed, the Raiders made a few more mistakes, and that was it. And that's the typical Jim Harbaugh way. Even if you look more recently in Michigan, I mean, they had that game where they didn't even pass the ball, and they had JJ McCarthy or something of that sort. So, it's not always pretty, but I will give credit. Jim Harbaugh is willing to do one of those guys. Just he doesn't care how it's done. Doesn't have to be beautiful, sexy. Doesn't Herbert doesn't have to throw for 200, 300 yards. He's still going to defend his guys, and especially as long as they get the win. And it's definitely a good culture setting vibe. As like you said, not pretty, but balanced and efficient, and just clean football, for lack of a better phrase there. So, good start to the Harbaugh regime there, and obviously, like I said, not really the start that the Raiders wanted, but at least you can maybe cope with the fact that this was on the road in a sense. So. Anyhow, let's move.
You can't cope that.
I don't know. I'm just
when you're I know, but when you're playing against the Chargers,
you should have. Yeah.
I almost guarantee there are more Raiders fans there than Chargers fans, considering the history of that state.
Because I was watching a Red Zone. If I remember correctly, I think that was actually at least 50-50. It is not. It was.
I'm not surprised.
Yeah. So anyhow, let's go on over, keeping it on the West Coast to Seattle, where the Seahawks got the victory over the Broncos at 26-20. Obviously, was like most of the rookies, not really the start that Bo Nix wanted, and Sean Payton. But once again, these are rookies. And it's week 1, and for lack of a better phrase, welcome to the NFL, Bo Nix. But what were your thoughts here in regards to the Seahawks, kind of gritting out this win as well?
For Bo Nix, it seemed like there was a lot of jitters. I'm going to be honest. It felt like he was rushing throws. It felt like he was trying to make things happen that weren't there. It seemed like classic rookie week 1 nervousness, which we don't see for every rookie, but it's definitely somewhat of a common thing. And, the rookies did not look great in this week 1. Bo Nix was no exception. I'm not going to overreact and say that he was awful because I've already seen people start doing that. He did throw 2 interceptions. He did throw 0 touchdowns. But like I said, when we did our picks, this is probably the worst environment you could possibly have for a rookie to start, and it's Seattle in Seattle. That's not what you want to be going up against, and so Seattle was able to take advantage of it. For the Seahawks, I feel like this should have been a more decisive win, quite frankly, but they shot themselves in the foot a couple times, whether it be the Geno Smith pick, the D. Williams fumble that they had, so. But at the same time, they recovered their own fumble on defense. They got the 2 interceptions. It just seems like Seattle should have won a lot more decisively. But at the same time, it is week 1. But when you have Kenneth Walker dominating on the ground like they did, and the defensive turnovers, it seems like, yeah, they should have come out on top a lot more decisively. But at the end of the day, they got the win. Solid for Seattle. Good start. You love to see Kenneth Walker doing his thing. DK Metcalf and Jackson Smith and Jigba weren't totally involved, but they really didn't have to, considering the fact that they ran the ball 33 times as a team. And yeah, so that was solid for the Broncos. The one thing I was a little concerned about is I didn't love the play calling in general from Sean Payton. It seems like with Bo Nix, he's looking nervous to start the game. He's making mistakes. I just don't think that the game plan going into week 1 against Seattle Seahawks with a rookie quarterback is to allow said rookie quarterback to throw the ball 42 times. I just don't think that that should be the game plan. I think that we should be running the ball a lot more. Now, I get it. Jaleel McLaughlin and Javonte Williams were both inefficient. Neither were able to get to 3 yards a carry. Like, Jaleel had 10 carries for 27 yards. Javonte Williams had 8 carries for 23 yards. So I understand. Like, neither running back was able to do much. But still, I feel like in a close ball game, where even at halftime you are winning, I feel like in the second half the plan should be to consistently run the ball and not allow your rookie quarterback to have to throw as much as he did. Because yeah, that's kind of what it was. It felt like pretty much every drive they would start off with maybe 1 or 2 runs, but for the most part it would always kind of result in Bo Nix having to start play hero ball. Because they would maybe get 1 yard on the first play, and then it's 2nd and 9, and instead of trying to continue to run the ball and try to make it 3rd and short, we just try to pass for it, and that was kind of the game plan. Once again, I don't totally blame him because of the ineffective of the running backs, but maybe you bring in Audric Esteem, even though I think he did lose a fumble. But I don't know, maybe you or actually it was McLaughlin who lost a fumble, so not Esteem. My apologies. But maybe you try to bring him in. I know he's a rookie. He did fumble. He didn't lose it. There you go. Anyway, I was not misremembering. So I don't know. I just felt like there should have been more attention to the ground game and maybe trying to do something creative, whether that be even like getting Marvin Mims around on an end around or something, because he only had 1 target on the whole game, didn't do anything. And it's just strange considering all the hype that Marvin Mims has been getting from this coaching staff ever since they drafted him in terms of his speed and his explosive playability. So yeah, I just didn't really love the game plan from the Broncos. But ultimately, the fact that it was as close as it was, despite all the mistakes and everything they made, I would say somewhat encouraging, I guess, but also not. It was a weird game.
I will say, like, their defense made some plays. I mean, early on, like you mentioned, definitely kind of got to Seattle, or not, yeah, to Seattle, made especially their pass rush a bit at the beginning. Cooper had a couple plays. Even Baron Browning was close. So that's, if you want to maybe have some hope going forward, there's that. As a Bo Nix guy, yeah, like I agree with what you said. I don't have anything else to add. Like, definitely, and Sean Payne kind of alluded to it too, and I think he did a good thing in trying to like be like he mentioned in his post game. He was trying to mention to like the receivers, hey, the receivers, they did have a couple of tough drops, so that doesn't help. And then obviously offensive line could have been better, but like you alluded to, like this is a tough environment to walk into on top of a talented defense with a new defensive coordinator. So you also don't really know what you're going to get in terms of looks and all that now. So I think that easily played a factor into as well, because obviously, like you mentioned, Nix did seem flustered in the pocket. A few extra. There was a couple plays where it definitely looked muddy there. So I'm sure they'll clean that up. Hopefully, I think this is maybe I worry because McLaughlin is obviously a Sean Payton guy. I do worry about the Javonte Williams workload because, yeah, like I'm with you. I would have liked to see them be a little more patient with the run, like you said, because they were in a power position for a good point in the game, and their defense was making plays. Like, they had 2 safeties this game, which I feel like is rare. So anyway, yeah, it's definitely a learning moment, and we'll see, how Payton and the offense move forward. And last note, this isn't really game related. I like the old Broncos uniforms better. I'm not a fan of the new ones.
Their new ones suck.
Like, I know a few teams are going to matte. The matte stuff. Some teams are just better glossy helmet and such, and that's Denver. And I don't know. Denver fans, chime in. How do you feel about the new uniforms? Because it's one of those things like a little bit of week 1 surprise. Like, I didn't even know that I had heard it before, but I forgot. So when I'm watching, I was like, oh yeah, they changed their uniforms, and I don't like this. So yeah, it's not my favorite. But anyway. Going for Seattle. We'll see the stats of Kenneth Walker, though, going forward. It has been an issue before. An abdomen injury kind of popped up. So, and I know that because also I am a Kenneth Walker owner. in a couple fantasy leagues. So that would be important to watch going forward if that's going to be their style. So anyway, moving on from Seattle winning there to your game, John, where, like you mentioned earlier, right before the game, Dak Prescott inks that contract, becomes the highest paid quarterback. I know in the league, is league history, I'm guessing, right? Because he got paid just more than Watson, correct?
Highest paid player in NFL history.
Player.
He's getting $60 million a year.
Yeah, so kudos to Zach.
Next closest is 55.
So kudos to Dak and whatever his agent team is getting that deal done, and obviously it seemed to carry in as Dallas came in and pretty much dominated the Browns from start to finish here. So what were your thoughts in regards to this dominant victory?
Yeah, just real quick on the contract. I mean, listen, if you've been listening to the podcast, I keep saying this. Jerry Jones is going to delay. He's going to talk all this crap. It's going to be, oh, they're not going to re-sign him, blah, blah, blah. This guy's not that important. And then at the end of the day, it always gets done, and that player will be a top 5 highest paid player at their position ever. It happened with Zeke. It happened with Jalen Smith. Well, Jalen Smith, actually, there was no drama. That one actually got signed super early, and it was pretty quick and easy. And I think that's because Jalen knew, like, this is a heck of a deal. Like, sure. Why would I not take this? But it happened with CeeDee Lamb. It happened with Dak twice now. So no surprise there that he got his contract. So good on Dak to get his money. Otherwise, for the win, Dallas just was able to win in all 3 phases. They had the huge return from Kevontae Turpin that resulted in a touchdown. They were able to do a lot better offensively because they did not turn the ball over. Dak did have a fumble, but Jalen Tolbert was able to recover it. So in general, they did much better on that end, to where Deshaun Watson, he also fumbled, but they recovered it, but then he threw the 2 picks. And so he honestly should have thrown more, because Trevon Diggs almost had a second one, and Kalen Carson, who I was actually surprised that he ended up getting the starting spot opposite of Diggs, was able to almost snag one himself. And he actually had a great day too. So shout out to Kalen Carson, rookie 5th round pick. But yeah, and then, so they did great on the defensive end. And then, like I said, they did better offensively as well. Zeke was able to score a touchdown. Brandon Cooks was able to get that 1 touchdown on that great offensive drive as well. So yeah, Dallas, I don't really have a ton to say. They won in all 3 phases. Cleveland, defensively, I thought they were okay for the most part. It just felt like Dallas was able to, for the most part, kind of neutralize Myles Garrett throughout the day. Shout out to Tyler Guyton, because I felt like he actually had a solid performance. And Myles Garrett wasn't able to be as effective as he usually is. And I think that's in large part due to the run blocking from the running backs, because they definitely were, chipping him with a tight end. Then he would go against Tyler Guyton, because that was the matchup he wanted throughout most of the day, as they were moving him around. And then after that, they would often leave a running back in to block. And that's because they know how disruptive Myles Garrett can be, and they were willing to say, we're not going to let you beat us, and if you're going to beat us, then it's got to be somebody else. And so they neutralized Myles Garrett, and it paid off because they were able to get the win. So shout out to the Cowboys. Don't really have much else to say about them. For the Browns, it was an ugly game, but at the same time, I'll cut them some slack because both their starting tackles were out. Once again, I thought they were actually going to be back for this game, but they were ruled out. And the Dallas defense was able to get a lot done off of that, because I think Myles Garrett had double-digit pressures. I believe that DeMarcus Lawrence also had double-digit pressures, and even the rookie Marshawn Nealand was able to get involved with, I think, like 7 pressures as well. So they were able to wreak havoc on the edge there, and Deshaun was under siege all day, and he was not able to have a good performance at all. So, yeah.
Yeah. One thing I want to add, which may be something I missed, because I think I picked Cleveland here, at least with 1.5 point spread. Jim Schwartz, DC of the Browns, and I think it seemed like Mike McCarthy had a good sense and familiarity with what Schwartz wanted to do defensively, especially some of the blitzes he saw early on. They had some answers, especially like there was that big CeeDee Lamb play. Dallas was willing. Yeah, it just seemed like Dallas had all the answers, especially in those moments, like you mentioned, running backs shipping. They just had a good sense of what to do, and obviously I think that comes from I forgot about this until I was watching the game, and I realized, and obviously the game was going, but obviously from McCarthy's time in Green Bay when he played Schwartz, when Schwartz was the head coach of the Lions. So I'm sure there's...
And even further than that, Schwartz was also the Eagles DC for a while there.
So yeah, I'm sure there's some carryover for that. But yeah, I mean, I think a big issue that obviously, some off the field stuff has popped up again. We'll see how it affects, but it's all eyes are on Deshaun Watson right now. And he did not. I know he didn't have the tackles like you mentioned, but even then, just I mean, he's just it's like the joke, the thing he sent in, like Deshaun Watson in term like figuratively, obviously not literally, may have just his career may have died on that massage table because he
Yeah.
just even elusiveness does not look the same, and even throwing the ball doesn't look the same in any sense. It doesn't look any like there's definitely losing hope. I mean, I'm almost at like 95, 99% like that. I've lost hope that he'll ever reach the Houston form again because like
I've lost hope completely.
and yeah.
I don't think he's ever going to be what he once was.
So, and it's just so Cleveland Browns because I mean we'll talk about someone else in a minute, but I mean yeah they took a gamble. They gave up a lot despite knowing the situation and such, and made him. But at least before Dak signed his deal, he was one of the highest paid quarterbacks. I think he was the highest. I think per year, whatever, up there, regardless. And yeah, it sucks because we know that this team's good enough. They went to the playoffs with Joe Flacco last year at the helm, 4 different starting quarterbacks. And granted, I know there's no Nick Chubb and such, but still, just has not looked good in terms of that. So we'll see how the situation goes going forward. Also, no Njoku. They lost them midway through the game, and we know how big of a PC is for them. So, and I know Amari didn't have the greatest game. Obviously, you mentioned Dallas secondaries was awesome. Kudos to them as well. I'm sorry, one more thing. Kudos to Mike Zimmer and the defense too. I was worried about that, but it seems like I like what he's doing. Not maybe not as aggressive as Dan Quinn, but I think that's a good thing because sometimes that would lead to teams taking advantage of Dallas's over aggressiveness, especially in the secondary. But nonetheless, we'll see how that goes going forward for Dallas defense. And yeah, if the Browns can kind of once again pick up the pieces here. Granted, like I said, they did do this last season where it wasn't pretty with Watson, but they figured out ways to win. So maybe if they get a few more pieces back, they can figure that out. But definitely not the start of the year that they wanted, especially at home. But if that was all, I'm going to move on to the next one because speaking of the Browns, good old Baker Mayfield. On the flip side, him and the Bucks kind of went crazy against the Washington Commanders. This one was convincing, 37-20. Baker Mayfield 4 touchdowns, and yeah, looking pretty sharp. And I'm sure he definitely had a smiled internally seeing. I'm sure a bunch of people probably added him because that seems to be the conversation. Is that man so Cleveland that they let Baker go and all of that fiasco, and he found a home and is balling out in Tampa here. But what were your thoughts in regards to the Bucks beating the Commanders?
I'm not surprised. We talked about it. We both kind of thought that might turn into a shootout. The Bucks were definitely the better team. Washington still has a long way to go, but honestly, I was encouraged by what I saw from Washington. The pass attack wasn't quite there yet with Jaden Daniels, but he was deadly on the run. 16 carries, 88 yards, and 2 touchdowns. So he's clearly able to become a huge difference maker in the run game. But at the same time, I think that maybe the Buccaneers were willing to live with that. He did fumble 3 times. I don't think he lost any of them, as I think 2 went out of bounds and they recovered the other one. But yeah, Tampa was willing to live with that because if he wasn't able to get much through the passing attack, I don't think they were going to be able to keep up because unfortunately for them, for Washington, their defense was not great. They were not able to slow down or pressure Baker much at all. He only got sacked 1 time. Other than that, he absolutely dominated through the air. Bucky Irving was able to make an impact late in the game on the ground, as Rachaad White wasn't able to get a ton going there. But Rachaad White was able to kill it when it came to the receiving game. Mike Evans got 2 touchdowns. Chris Godwin looked like he was back to his old form. I don't have much to say, quite frankly. Tampa, they looked really strong against, once again, an opponent that was just simply outmatched.
Yeah, only thing I want to add is, it's week 1, so not going to overreact, but I'm a little worried about the Washington's pass attack. We'll see. I don't know how Terry McLaurin only gets 4 targets, and you'd think that you would feature him a little bit more at Cliff Kingsbury. Just saying. He's obviously the best, target you have there. I don't know. And then even they bring in Austin Eckler. Maybe this is more in reference to anyway, Eckler wasn't used very much even in the run game, only 2 rushes. I know he's a little more of a scat back anyway, but even then it was a little bit effective anyway. So that's just, I just have that concern going forward. And I know you mentioned Jane had a good game on the ground, but like I mentioned with some of these other guys, I'm not sure if you want him running 16 times per game on top of, sitting back there taking a couple of sacks like he did and dropping back as much. So maybe you have to find a balance there between that. Now, granted, some of those maybe were called pass plays and he tucked and run, but still, especially with we have concern. One of the concerns coming out is his frame. So, and to be fair, Washington not a great track record in regards to their quarterback's health. Just saying. So, important things to note. But yeah, Bucks, they handled the business, and yeah, Baker awesome, as well as just the entire offense, like you mentioned. So, let's go on. Keep on moving to the Sunday night game. This one went down to the wire, as it was the Detroit Lions beating the Rams once again in the playoff rematch. This time went to overtime, and Rams with a walk-off touchdown, just feeding Dave Montgomery in that overtime drive. So what were your thoughts here in regards to the Lions prevailing over the Rams?
Yeah, by the way, you said Rams walk-off touchdown, Lions walk-off touchdown.
I'm sorry, Lions walk-off touchdown.
Yeah. Overall, I mean, it looked like classic Lions football. The only concerning part was the lack of Amon-Ra St. Brown production, but at the same time, they got Jameson Williams going, and this is the first game, I think, in his career where he really looked like the prospect that everyone expected him to be when they took him 13th overall. So he had a great performance and was able to look really explosive. That like you said, David Montgomery was absolutely dominant. That OT, he literally just took over and won them the game. So shout out to David Montgomery in that offensive line. Jahmyr Gibbs wasn't as effective when it came to the run game, but he also chipped in when it came to the receiving game. So he was definitely an impact player as well. And yeah, the Lions, they looked really good. The Rams, I think, on the other side looked good as well. I still think that the Lions have some concerns when it comes to that secondary. Matthew Stafford had over 300 yards, which correct me if I'm wrong, I think that led the league on the week.
Yeah,
in terms of
not a
total
good passing week for quarterbacks.
Yeah, but Matt Stafford, I mean, he did throw the ball one shy of 50 times, so there was a lot of attempts here. But at the same time, your secondary allowed 300 receiving yards or 300 passing yards after last year, where it was very clearly a huge weakness on your team, and that's despite the fact that Puka Nacua, who did have a hot start, unfortunately did get hurt. We're hoping, I don't know the official reports if they're out yet on how long he's going to be out.
They already put him on IR, so he's going to be at least out 4 weeks.
At least 4 weeks, and let's hope it's not longer than that, because it would suck considering how great of a year he had and the kind of revelation he was for them last season if he couldn't play. But in his absence, Cooper Kupp looked really good. Tyler Johnson certainly stepped up, and they were in true Matthew Stafford fashion able to get a lot of people involved. Demarcus Robinson, Kyron Williams, Colby Parkinson, all getting involved there. So yeah, although the Rams lost this one, the Lions are a really good team. They went to the NFC Championship last year. I think if they could maybe be a little more effective in the run game, Kyron Williams, 18 carries, but only 50 yards. I'm wondering if maybe we could get another running back involved just to lighten the workload and maybe try and have like a Thunder Lightning kind of thing. We thought that would maybe be Blake Corum. He didn't get a touch at all in this game. Ronnie Rivers got 2 carries for 16 yards, so maybe he'll be the second back. I'm not sure. But yeah, I think maybe when those games where one running back just really isn't working, throw in like 5 or 6 carries to another guy just to see if you can get some explosive plays on the ground. Kind of like what we saw out of Tampa where, okay, Rachaad White not getting a lock done. Bucky Irving, he comes in, he gets some explosive plays. Boom, there you go. Kind of gets the offense going. So because sometimes you just need a different set of eyes to hit some of these holes and see what happens. So yeah, I'd love to see that out of the Rams. Otherwise, I don't have a ton of complaints, especially considering how effective Matthew Stafford was able to be. He did have that one interception, which we don't love, but it is what it is. And for the Lions, you came out on top. That's really all that matters. And you played classic Lions football. And things are probably only up from here if Amon-Ra St. Brown can get more involved.
Yeah, same for Salem-Port. I know he didn't. But I'm sure it was part of the Rams' game plan because I'm going to absolutely torch them in the playoff game. So maybe I'm sure that was a point of emphasis. And I wanted to add on to maybe a reason why Kyron wasn't as effective. I mean, also Rams lost their 2 tackles in this game as well, which was an issue. True. So that, and they obviously were behind. Had to play from behind for a bit. Obviously going into the fourth quarter. So just some copium there, and obviously losing, like you mentioned, losing Puka is huge and it sucks because we all wanted to see how dangerous the attack could be with both him and Kupp, healthy and back in the fold. So hopefully he can get back quickly there. Well, the only other thing I wanted to add, because you kind of hit all the main points, is, and you kind of mentioned it, is the interception at the end of half. Obviously, Stafford was a big reason and got them back into the game in the fourth quarter, but obviously that was a backbreaker because, like I mentioned, that they're right in the red zone when he threw that interception. Then obviously, that was like almost the last play. So even if they get a field goal there, obviously a much different game uh, going forward from there. But no, I mean, I'm not going to harp on it too much. It's Matthew Stafford. For every interception like that he might throw, he's going to probably make 2 or 3 more plays, like we saw throughout the night. But he had some no looks, he had some throws where he was literally just getting it off and then getting drilled. So it's one where I'm with you. I'm like, I'm not going to sit here and flame him too much because we know he makes a lot of plays otherwise. So tough loss for the Rams. Obviously, big win for the Lions, and just continuing to establish that identity. But let's go on lastly and not leastly to the Monday Nighter, as the 49ers, without Christian McCaffrey, to some people's very upset about that. Without Christian McCaffrey, no problem. They beat the Jets 32-19. And it was like a last touchdown by Tyrod Taylor that really made it 19. So a little bit more of a rout than it looks. What were your thoughts on the Monday Nighter, John?
I was definitely concerned when it came to the Jets defense. They didn't get a lot of pressure onto Brock Purdy. Now Purdy didn't necessarily destroy them, but he was able to largely do what he wanted to do. And it felt like they just, specifically when it came to their edge rushers, were not able to make him feel uncomfortable, even if it didn't result in a sack. And they just gave him a lot of clean pockets and open time. Which, once again, that's kind of what the Niners do. But it felt like if you want to have a chance in this game, you definitely are going to have to make Brock Purdy feel some discomfort, even if it's not necessarily actually, resulting in the sack. So didn't love that. Also, the run defense wasn't great at all. I know that it's the San Francisco 49ers, and they can get anybody 100 yards when you've got Kyle Shanahan and that offensive line. But, man, they really didn't stop Jordan Mason at all. Once again, when I talk about Brock Purdy being able to do whatever he wanted, it felt like Jordan Mason in the run game were able to do whatever they wanted. Don't love that from the Jets defense. I really felt like, in this kind of a matchup, yes, we know they have Aaron Rodgers and Breece Hall and Garrett Wilson and all these kind of guys on the offensive side, but that's kind of it. And, you're really hoping that this team that last year was as good as they were because of their defense, that defense would have to show up big for you in a big matchup like this. So I'm hoping that for the future matchups for the Jets, that their defense can definitely do better than they did in this one, because it felt like the defense kind of let them down. At the same time, the passing attack was largely pretty bad. It was kind of just Garrett Wilson for the most part and Breece Hall. I know Allen Lazard ended up having like the best receiving stat line, but some of that did come with Tyrod Taylor, like you said, with the backups. That's when he got a second touchdown. I think that when you're the Jets, yes, you want Breece and Garrett Wilson to be heavily involved. By no means am I asking for them not to be, but you definitely need key contributions from other guys throughout the game. I don't love the fact that Breece Hall got 16 carries, Braylon Allen got 1. I think you want to try and involve another running back, at least, like I said with the previous game, at least 5 or 6 times throughout the game to give your guy a little bit of a rest and show the defense a different look, especially since Braylon Allen's kind of like a thumper who can, show you more when it comes to like the power run game. And then even the receiving game, literally Breece Hall, 6 targets, Garrett Wilson, 11, Allen Lazard ended up finishing with 9. Can we get Tyler Conklin a little bit more involved? Can we get some of the other receivers a little bit more involved? We want to spread the ball out and really stress every area of the defense that's not just,
was Mike Williams
their top
active,
guys.
By
Like,
the way? I didn't even know that he didn't get. I don't think he was inactive. I'll double check. I'm just saying that also because, like, on top of your point.
Sorry, who are you asking about?
Mike Williams, because they brought in Mike Williams.
Did Mike Williams play?
He's not listed as out, so he just didn't.
I didn't
play or didn't get targeted.
Seeing him. He had 9 snaps.
So he was out
9
there.
9 snaps is low.
Granted,
0 targets.
Coming off a knee injury, so maybe they were still. But regardless, didn't get looked at. He was.
Yeah. But I mean, yeah, like I didn't notice him at all out there, quite frankly. So maybe he was. I looked his name up and it says he was being used as a decoy or something. So maybe the injury, he's truly not quite ready to come back. But then if that's the case, that's where I'm like, what about the young receiver Corley? What about Xavier Gibson? Like, let's try to get some of these young guys involved and just see what they can do. And maybe they can win a route or two and make an explosive play happen. Because if the offensive game plan is only Breece Hall, only Garrett Wilson, then we sprinkle in some Allen Lazard, that you're not going to win many football games because that's too predictable. So, yeah, for the Jets, it's week one. Once again, not overreacting. It was one of the toughest opponents you could possibly start the game with. You give Kyle Shanahan an entire offseason to prepare for your defense. I'm not totally surprised that it went the way it did. But yeah, for the Jets, definitely looking for their defense to be a lot better and for their offense to be a little more diverse.
Yeah. I'm not going to be too critical, but once again, I'm just going to say with Aaron Rodgers, I know he had the one touchdown on the free play, but other than that, I mean, even like you alluded to, very just dink and dunk, and I know that's his style right now, but it's tough to like. There's a reason he's had an issue beating the Niners, even going back to the Packers. At points you're going to have to push the envelope and be a bit aggressive, not just when you have a free play, and so I like to see that more because it seemed and I do want to add too, didn't help that they had a very slow start. Obviously, Lazard had that tough drop like on their first drive on the key third down, right. And then next drive, Brees Hall gets stripped, so they're already behind the 8 ball, and then it doesn't help when you're playing the Niners because then now they know that you're back. Yeah, now that they can start peeling the ears back and maybe unleashing the pass rush more, which is what they want to do. But yeah, it'd be interesting just to see how they bounce back going forward. But yeah, I'm with you. I think it's just unfortunate, especially Niners at home, and then the familiarity there, like we mentioned in the picks last week, where we were interesting to see who would get kind of the advantage. Like you alluded to, it seemed like Kyle Shanahan had the advantage here and took advantage because even with Jordan Mason, like you said, they were just able. It was. And no, I'm not trying to take anything away from Jordan Mason. He was awesome, but there were some holes there, and it didn't seem like. Yeah, it seemed like the Jets were really missing. I'm not saying he would have made a huge difference, but they probably would have liked having Hassan Reddick there, like you said, to maybe be there for an extra play or two to maybe, disrupt a pass play or even one of those run plays. So we'll see how that situation goes on, and obviously how the offense flows. I mean, I guess you get a check mark, a good thing. Aaron Rodgers made it through a game, so now you get maybe breathe a little bit more as a Jet fan, and we'll see how they can keep moving forward from this. I'm not. I do want to add one thing too. Last point. I know he's on the hot seat. I agree why he's on the hot seat. A little absurd that we're already calling for Robert Saleh's head. I know the defense. Like it's the Niners. Get people. Week one, like we are just saying, it's a pretty tough opponent to have out of the gate,
right.
Especially with a quarterback that only played 4 snaps for you last year. So you still don't know what you're getting out of there. So and it's still a relatively young defense too. So. Yeah. In terms of all
the only reason I'm not totally surprised by it is because of the absurdity of last year's QB situation where they were just flip-flopping over and over, and that goes back to the head coach. Like, that was ridiculous. But if we're basing it off of the Niners game, come on. That's a little ridiculous.
Yeah, so be a little more patient, Jets fans. I always feel like I'm at war with them. But anyway, be more patient. We'll see how they go. But, big win for the Niners. And, it's week one wrapped up in a nutshell. So any other thoughts or concerns before we close it out there?
Like we've said every year pretty much, don't overreact to week one. I know that there's always those Twitter stats that go out there and say teams who are 0-1 make the playoffs like 28% of the time or whatever the number is or something. The teams who 1-0. It's the NFL. Let's not overreact. How many times have we seen the Bengals start slow in week one? Joe Burrow throws 4 picks against the Steelers that a couple of years ago, and they, all of a sudden they're going to the Super Bowl. So it's like, obviously that's one example. That's not going to be every team, but you get the point. Like, don't overreact to week one, whether you won, whether you lost. On to week two, as Bill Belichick would say, we're on to Cincinnati.
Also, sorry, and to add to that point, just before we even call it, this is what, year 2 or 3 of having this 17 game schedule. Like, so even the sample size before. As someone who took statistics and such, like sometimes those samples may be a little bit skewed because they're sure there were shorter seasons and such back then and whatnot. There's all these other factors. So don't lose hope, folks. It's only week one, even in fantasy too, because I know some people are probably already hitting the panic. But anyway, that'll do it for John and myself. We'll be back later in the week to obviously make our picks for week 2. So we'll be doing that, of course. But otherwise, we'll see you all on the other side. Hope you enjoyed, and adios.